Thank you very much. This time I'll make the first question. Margaret, take names. 3 short comments. There's something that bothers me a little with your talk that sounds in the beginning a little Malthusian, if you may allow me to say. And maybe we present more Schumpeter way of looking that is not if you do something, we do less the other thing, but technology has to do with economic growth and the capacity to do more overall. And one you could think, go back to 1960, and then kidney transplantation could have been presented in this room as extremely prohibitive, personalized by HBO medicine that hardly nobody would afford. And a few years later, you know, it's covered by Medicare. In Haiti, there's still no dialysis, but it's. And then when you talk about there could be non-precise goods that may be used in a more precise manner. So the statin is a non-precise good, but if there's a way to tell you which statin to take among those already in the market, the additional cost involved is not that significant. And there are also levels of prevention. It's another metaphysical point, because when Leroy Hood, Dr. Hood spoke about prevention, he meant prevention at the clinical level before you feel ill, but it's secondary, it's primary prevention at the clinical level, but secondary prevention at the system level, because there's already something in your genes or in your molecules that he's targeting. And I think that this vision of precision medicine, if we wish to pay more justice to it, is to be built on top of public health and not to substitute it, if I'm right.
Thanks. I'll try and reply to each of those. I might go in reverse order. So the first question I'll address is really about, well, the relationship between precision medicine and public health. I think my worry here was just that, in fact, in many countries you're going to see that the two are competing for budgets. So in one thing, I guess it's quite possible to say, well, let's just assume we've got public health right, and then what do we do next? But that we haven't got public health right, and in fact we're getting worse at public health because we're diverting resources away from it in order to do things like precision medicine. And so that was the reason to maybe to put it rhetorically in the way that I did. In one way, we could just stop the conversation and say, well, yes, for sure, we should put as much resources as we can into public health. Let's assume we've done that. Let's talk about precision medicine. I guess I could say, well, sure, okay, I'd agree with you in that case, but the fact is that's not what we're doing. I guess the second question was one about almost sort of precise targeting of drugs that were not sort of designed as precision medicine interventions. And I think it's a good point, and it's been something I've been meaning to say in the talk, but I realised I skipped one or two bits when I was putting the slides together. So that I think that's an important point, and that maybe what that shows is that I'm not at all arguing against the idea of precision where it's useful. What I was arguing for was, let's think about precision medicine in the context of the importance of cost effectiveness, so that if you can show me cases where we have a drug which is already available and it's cheap and we want to work out and we can have good ways of working out who to give that drug to more effectively, and that'll make it more cost effective, and say, well, that's brilliant, that's exactly the sort of thing that we should be doing. And so that certainly with some of my colleagues at UCL, working on thinking about how to redesign the use of the university hospital, to think about some efficiencies that you can get through understanding a lot more about the data we have about each patient, for example, even predicting simple things like, well, which patients are more likely to fail to attend the appointment, so you can send them personalised reminders, so we can try to work out with greater precision how many patients you can book in a day. All those sorts of things, they're ways of mobilising knowledge data we have in a way that increases cost effectiveness. That's all grist to my mill. I wouldn't be objecting to any of that. The worry would be about where we end up spending a lot of resources on on interventions that turn out to be just really cost effective at the cost of doing things that could have been more cost effective. The last point you made was one about, well, will there be interventions which start off very cost ineffective, but we can, by doing them more, we can get more cost effective at them. I think it's a reasonable point, and that it's, I think a lot of it's going to come down to, well, how low can we get the cost of some of these drugs or some of these interventions? If it's going to start at $200,000 per person per year, and you say, well, by better manufacturing processes we can get it down to 100,000, they think, well, it's still going to be unaffordable. If it's going to be plausible that we can make these as generics, for example, and say, well, we can bring that cost down in the same way as we're able to do, for example, the cost of the sort of triple cocktail for HIV, so from $10,000 to $150 per person. Well, that's exactly what we should be doing. But my worry so far is it's not clear that that's going to happen, given that we've seen medicines designed very often for small niches, and the manufacturing processes may always be expensive, and you may not get those economies of scale.
Lander and Prinsak.
So I just want to press you on this very point, because when you think about cost effectiveness, it's integrated over what period? And it also depends on what ability you have to affect the development of that particular therapy or device. The UK is a serious enough country that you should be thinking not just as a passive receiver of price, but as a shaper of the market. So penicillin, when it first came out, was 50-fold more expensive than it was sometime later, and much more than sometime after that. And had governments not bought it at the high price, they wouldn't get it at the low price later. The same was true with the pump priming that the Department of Defense in the United States did with semiconductors, which were outrageously expensive. But they bought them because they knew they'd create a market and bring them down. And human genome sequences, we blew $3 billion on the first one, and now I can get it to you for $500, and it'll be down to $100. So I appreciate this doesn't apply to everything, and this is not an easy thing to do, but the UK is one of the world's leading biomedical research countries. How do you think about your role and responsibility to think about unlocking the efficiencies that could be produced over a decade or more versus cutting them out? Or do you just basically leave it to the United States to handle all these costs?
I'm not sure I can speak on behalf of the UK government for this, but I mean, I think one of the reasons why the UK government probably does take precisely the view that you're recommending is that because we actually have quite a large pharmaceutical industry within the UK, and it would be catastrophic if they followed what I said here and say, well, we're just not going to buy these sort of drugs anymore because we could save a lot more lives by doing something else. But that I take that worry about, well, maybe we need to invest now for the future, but that I think also about the people who are going to die while you're doing that. And so often we get very upset about the little child who doesn't get the very expensive treatment and sadly dies, but that at the moment in the UK there's 40,000 people a year are dying as a result of air pollution. The government hasn't taken cost-effective measures on that. But partly because those people are more difficult to identify and so on, there's much less public outcry about it. And that I think that if you start from the idea that each life has equal value, then it's not hard to think that saving more lives is better than saving less.
Oh, but at any given time instant, if the only problem were to decide what to do this week, that's easy. Now integrate over time with costs that change, and this problem involves intergenerational trade-offs, economic cost curves. I'm just curious, you've given yourself the easy problem. Of course I agree with you. The sympathetic case today should be not weighed against but you're running a country for decades. How do you balance across time like that?
Yeah.
It's not easy. I'm just closing. You don't have to.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good challenge, and I did try to answer this challenge in an article I wrote about 5 years ago, just called Paying for Patented Medicines is Hard to Justify. I have to say, I came up with an argument basically saying that we shouldn't be buying them. And I've never found anyone who agrees with my argument. Even I'm not sure I agree with it anymore. And so yeah, I think it's a challenge. Not quite sure what to say about it, but I think, yeah. So in some ways, I was trying to be provocative. Was at least get us to think about the limitations of some of these arguments. But yes, I accept there's more thinking to be done.
Thank you, James. My first question is, when you, I'm sympathetic with almost everything you've said, but when you say that the focus on precision medicine is diverting attention and resources away from public health interventions, aren't you buying into the assumption, the problematic assumption that there's a finite amount of money available that could go into health? I mean, should we not actually argue for more money going into health, public health interventions at the same time as promoting precision medicine in the sort of high-tech variant? That's my first question. And the second question is, I mean, I've tried to raise this topic a couple of times and I've never had any response so far. Maybe you can give me a response. What about this precision public health thing? I mean, you say when we have network goods and when we have non-rivalrous goods, interventions should not be precise. But this is exactly what the precision public health community challenges and says, if we just provide it equally to everyone, then those who are underserved will be even more underserved. So we need to target even network and non-rivalrous goods.
So on the first question, I think it's certainly true we could just argue for a bigger health budget overall. I think for some of the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, it seems that's actually quite a difficult thing to do at the moment. And so that certainly in the UK, the government sort of priding itself on, as it were, somewhat increasing the health budget, but that the only way they were able to claim that they were making more money available to the NHS was, as it were, by moving some money around and sort of moving, as it were, reducing money from the public health budget and putting it into the budget for the hospitals. So that it's only in the UK we're in a situation where there doesn't seem to be any particular public appetite to increase health budgets, and that you are seeing that reduction. Yeah. No, I would agree we shouldn't accept it, but that, yeah, maybe we can agree on that, just in terms of sort of the politics of this and how we're actually going to get the health budget increased. I'm not quite sure how we do that. We can, as it were, say that we don't accept it, but that if we're faced with the reality we're faced with is that you have a budget which is limited and nobody really wants to increase it, then I think one of the things you can do is to think about how to use that budget more cost effectively. So a question about precision public health. I guess my sort of vision for how to answer that kind of challenge is maybe often it can be more effective to go for sort of universal coverage, plus then think about particular populations who you're aware of, either a priori or a result of the research you do, who are likely to be underserved by those particular interventions. Think, well, what can we do to particularly improve or take the intervention or improve the lives of those people who are likely to be underserved? Maybe it's a slightly different way of doing precision, as it were, sort of universal plus some sort of attention to people who are likely to be worse off. But I take the worry seriously that public health interventions are maybe quite likely to increase health inequalities, particularly when you have interventions which are mostly involve giving people more information. You're highly likely to get more take-up from those who are already better off. So I think it's a serious worry, but I don't think that should sort of stop us from trying to create public goods or network goods when that would be a useful thing to do.
Thank you very much. I will keep your question as the first for the next session.